Ford drivers, listen up. They're recalling nearly 2 million Explorer SUVs because of possible safety hazards. Ford now says it's aware of more than 500 complaints and 14,000 warranty reports about that faulty part.
The SUV market has always been a symbol of ambition. From rugged off-roaders to family haulers packed with tech, the idea has always been to combine power, comfort, and utility in one package. But somewhere along the road, automakers got a little too confident, or maybe just desperate to catch a trend. They released models that either confused buyers, fell apart under pressure, or tried too hard to stand out. Some of these vehicles were so poorly timed, so badly designed, or so mechanically flawed that even loyal brand fans turned their backs. Today, we're looking at 10 SUVs that probably never should have seen the light of day. Vehicles that serve as perfect reminders that bigger doesn't always mean better, and innovation without direction can turn into disaster. Number 10. Pontiac Aztec. Few SUVs have become as notorious as the Pontiac Aztec. When it debuted in 2000, General Motors hoped it would attract young, adventurous buyers with its bold, futuristic design and lifestyle-focused features. The problem? It looked nothing like what anyone expected, and not in a good way. The Aztec's styling was a mix of awkward lines, clashing panels, and a rear end that looked like it was designed by 3 different teams who never met each other. Reviewers called it a design experiment gone wrong, while consumers were even harsher. It was supposed to be a sporty crossover for a new generation, but it quickly became a pop culture punchline. Underneath, the Aztec wasn't a complete failure. It shared its platform with the more sensible Buick Rendezvous and offered decent cargo space, optional all-wheel drive, and even an available tent package for camping enthusiasts. But none of that could save it from its reputation as one of the ugliest vehicles ever made. Sales were dismal, just around 27,000 units in its first year. And by 2005, Pontiac quietly pulled the plug. Ironically, years later, the Aztec found new life as the car driven by Walter White in Breaking Bad, giving it a cult following. But as far as GM's history goes, the Aztec remains one of the clearest examples of how poor design can overshadow every good idea behind it. Number 9. Nissan Murano CrossCabriolet. If there's ever been a car that made people say, "Wait, why?" it's the Nissan Murano CrossCabriolet. Introduced in 2011, this convertible SUV tried to merge the practicality of an SUV with the fun of a luxury convertible. A concept that sounded innovative on paper, but made little sense in reality. To make the Murano roofless, Nissan had to completely re-engineer the frame, removing the rear doors and adding reinforcement to keep it from flexing. The result was a 2-door SUV with the size of a crossover, but the practicality of a compact coupe. The styling didn't help either. The proportions looked awkward, and with the top down, the rear end appeared bulky and unfinished. Performance-wise, it used the same 3.5-liter V6 engine found in the regular Murano. But all that extra weight from body reinforcements made it slower and less efficient. Reviewers complained about excessive body roll, limited visibility, and a price tag that touched luxury territory, around $47,000. For comparison, that was more expensive than an Audi Q5 at the time. Buyers simply didn't understand who the car was for. It wasn't sporty enough for convertible fans, and it wasn't practical enough for SUV owners. By 2014, Nissan ended production after just a few years. The CrossCabriolet remains one of the strangest experiments in automotive history. A car that answered a question no one was asking. Number 8. Chrysler Aspen Hybrid. In 2008, Chrysler launched what it thought was a masterstroke, the Aspen Hybrid. It was supposed to offer full-size SUV comfort with hybrid efficiency. Unfortunately, it arrived at the worst possible time and represented everything wrong with Chrysler's late 2000s strategy. For starters, the Aspen was already a heavy, truck-based SUV derived from the Dodge Durango. Adding a hybrid system only made it heavier and more expensive. Despite the hybrid badge, its fuel economy gains were minimal. It managed around 19 miles per gallon combined, barely better than the regular version. Buyers expected Prius-like efficiency, but what they got was a thirsty SUV that cost thousands more. Worse, 2008 was the year of the global financial crisis. Gas prices were spiking, consumer confidence was plummeting, and Chrysler was heading toward bankruptcy. Launching a $45,000 hybrid SUV when people were downsizing to compact cars was a catastrophic decision. The Aspen Hybrid sold only a few hundred units before Chrysler axed both the vehicle and the brand's hybrid experiment entirely in 2009. The company learned the hard way that slapping a hybrid badge on a heavy gas guzzler doesn't make it green. Today, the Aspen Hybrid is mostly remembered as a symbol of misplaced timing. A well-intentioned idea that arrived in the worst possible moment. Number 7. Hummer H2. If there was ever a vehicle that embodied excess, it was the Hummer H2. Launched in 2002, it was supposed to be the ultimate status symbol. Big, bold, and unmistakably American. But while it looked like it could roll through a war zone, it was mostly just an oversized Chevy Tahoe dressed up in military clothing. The H2 weighed over 6,000 pounds, had a 6.0-liter V8 that guzzled fuel like a jet engine, and offered single-digit gas mileage in real-world conditions. Even when gas prices skyrocketed in the mid-2000s, Hummer proudly marketed it as rugged luxury. That arrogance backfired. Critics slammed it for its poor handling, cramped third row, and massive blind spots. Environmental groups used it as the poster child for everything wrong with gas-guzzling SUVs. By the time GM went bankrupt in 2009, the H2 had become a liability, expensive to build and impossible to justify. Despite that, it left an undeniable cultural mark. Celebrities and athletes bought them as symbols of power, but for everyday drivers, it was just too much vehicle for too little sense. When production stopped in 2010, few tears were shed. Ironically, Hummer is now back as an electric brand, a full-circle moment that reminds us just how much times have changed since the days of the H2's excess. Number 6. Suzuki XL7. Suzuki had big ambitions when it introduced the XL7 in the early 2000s. The company wanted to step up from small cars and compact SUVs into the competitive mid-size market. Unfortunately, the XL7 was a misfire on almost every front. The first-generation model, released in 2001, was underpowered, noisy, and outdated from day one. It used an old-school V6 engine that felt sluggish under the vehicle's weight, and its interior felt cheap compared to rivals like the Toyota Highlander or Honda Pilot. Suzuki marketed it as rugged and versatile, but it lacked both refinement and reliability. The second-generation XL7 arrived in 2007, co-developed with General Motors, and somehow got even worse. Built on a Chevrolet Equinox platform, it sacrificed off-road capability for bland on-road performance. Reviewers criticized its dull handling, weak acceleration, and disappointing fuel economy. The biggest problem, however, wasn't just the car. It was the brand. Suzuki's dealership network in the US was shrinking fast, and its reputation for cheap small cars didn't help. The XL7 was supposed to change that image, but instead, it reinforced it. By 2009, sales had fallen to a trickle, and Suzuki quietly discontinued the model. A few years later, the company left the American market altogether. The XL7 remains a forgotten attempt at Americanizing a Japanese brand that never quite understood what US SUV buyers wanted. Number 5. Jeep Compass, 2007. When Jeep announced the Compass in 2007, enthusiasts were cautiously optimistic. Here was a smaller, affordable Jeep that could appeal to urban drivers while still carrying the brand's rugged DNA. What they got instead was one of the most disappointing Jeeps ever built. The first-generation Compass shared its platform with the Dodge Caliber, and that's where the problem started. It lacked the off-road capability Jeep was known for, with poor ground clearance, a weak all-wheel drive system, and plastic underbody parts that couldn't handle serious terrain. Under the hood, it used a 2.4-liter four-cylinder engine that sounded coarse and offered sluggish acceleration. The continuously variable transmission, CVT, made things worse, often droning loudly without delivering any real power. Inside, the Compass looked and felt cheap. Hard plastics, poor fitment, and rattles were common complaints. Critics and loyal Jeep fans alike tore it apart. One review called it a Jeep in name only. Even Jeep engineers admitted the Compass was rushed to market to fill a segment gap rather than meet the brand's heritage. Sales limped along thanks to its low price, but the model's reputation was permanently scarred. Jeep tried to fix things in later generations, and by the time the 2017 redesign arrived, the Compass had finally earned respect. But the original 2007 model stands as one of Jeep's lowest points. A reminder that brand loyalty can only carry you so far when the product doesn't deliver. Number 4. Lincoln MKT. Luxury automakers often experiment with bold designs, but the Lincoln MKT proved that not every experiment pays off. Released in 2010, the MKT was Lincoln's attempt to create a high-end crossover with 3 rows of seating. Instead, it ended up being one of the most polarizing vehicles in the brand's history. The styling was the first red flag. Its long, sloping roofline and narrow rear made it look more like a futuristic hearse than a luxury SUV. Many even joked it looked ready for a funeral procession. Inside, Lincoln packed it with premium materials and tech, adaptive cruise control, THX audio, and a twin-turbo V6 engine that could actually move. But it was all wrapped in a body that few people wanted to be seen driving. Its platform was shared with the Ford Flex, a car that was more practical and cheaper. The MKT, on the other hand, cost thousands more, but offered little improvement in ride comfort or utility. The third-row seats were cramped, and the overall shape made visibility poor. Despite Lincoln's efforts, buyers stayed away. Dealerships often had to discount MKTs heavily, just to move them off the lot. Production limped along for nearly a decade, mostly because limo and airport shuttle companies bought them in small numbers. When it finally ended in 2019, Lincoln didn't even bother with a farewell. The MKT quietly disappeared, replaced by more sensible crossovers like the Aviator, a clear sign that the brand had learned from its mistake. Number 3. Mitsubishi Endeavor. In the early 2000s, Mitsubishi was desperate for a hit. The brand had been losing traction in the US market, and the Endeavor was supposed to turn things around. A mid-size SUV built in America for American families. Launched in 2003, it looked promising on paper. A powerful V6 engine, roomy interior, and sleek styling for the time. But it never found its footing. The Endeavor's biggest problem was that it didn't stand out. It wasn't bad enough to be infamous, but it wasn't good enough to compete. The market was already dominated by the Toyota Highlander, Honda Pilot, and Ford Explorer, all of which offered better fuel economy, reliability, and resale value. The Endeavor's 3.8-liter V6 delivered decent power, but its 4-speed automatic transmission felt outdated, and its fuel economy hovered around 16 miles per gallon. Interior quality was another weak spot. While Mitsubishi advertised Japanese craftsmanship, the cabin was full of hard plastics, cheap trim, and dated electronics. And even though it was marketed as a family SUV, the Endeavor lacked a third-row option, a fatal oversight in a segment that demanded it. Mitsubishi tried to revive interest with a 2010 facelift, but it was too late. The SUV looked nearly identical, offered no major updates, and continued to fade from memory. By 2011, Mitsubishi discontinued the model entirely. The Endeavor's story is one of missed opportunities. It had potential, but poor timing, weak marketing, and a lack of identity doomed it from the start. In hindsight, it became a symbol of Mitsubishi's slow retreat from mainstream relevance in America. Number 2. Cadillac SRX, first generation. When Cadillac launched the SRX in 2004, it was trying to redefine itself for a new era. Younger buyers, modern design, and SUV practicality. But the first-generation SRX struggled to deliver on that promise. Instead of being a sleek, luxurious crossover, it felt like Cadillac was trying too hard to please everyone, and ended up pleasing no one. The SRX came with 2 engine options, a 3.6-liter V6 and a 4.6-liter Northstar V8. Both offered solid power, but the transmission was clunky, and the driving experience felt more like a sports sedan pretending to be an SUV. While Cadillac marketed it as a performance crossover, it had a harsh ride and poor fuel economy, averaging around 15 to 17 miles per gallon. Inside, it suffered from a case of confused identity. Some trims were covered in cheap plastics that didn't belong in a luxury vehicle, while others overcompensated with overly shiny wood accents that looked dated even at launch. The optional third row was so cramped it was nearly useless, and the overall interior layout felt unintuitive. Reliability was another headache. The SRX's electrical issues, transmission failures, and costly maintenance drove away early adopters. Consumer Reports frequently listed it as one of the least reliable SUVs in its class. Cadillac eventually got it right with the second-generation SRX that arrived in 2010, which became a hit. But the first generation's mixed identity and poor execution nearly killed the model before it had a chance to evolve. Today, that original SRX stands as a lesson in how not to launch a luxury crossover. Number 1. Ford Explorer, Firestone Tire Recall Era. At the top of this list sits one of the most infamous SUVs in automotive history. The Ford Explorer during the Firestone tire recall crisis of the early 2000s. On its own, The Explorer was one of the most successful SUVs ever built. But a deadly combination of design flaws, tire failures, and corporate missteps turned it into a PR disaster that shook the entire industry. The issue stemmed from a batch of Firestone tires, specifically the ATX and Wilderness models, which were prone to tread separation. On paper, that sounds like a tire problem, but the situation was far more complex. The Explorer's high center of gravity and soft suspension tuning made it especially vulnerable to rollovers when a tire blew out. Thousands of accidents were reported, leading to more than 270 deaths in the U.S. alone. The result was one of the largest recalls in automotive history. More than 6.5 million tires were replaced. Ford and Firestone, longtime partners, publicly blamed each other, and their relationship collapsed. The incident exposed how safety shortcuts, cost-cutting, and poor design decisions can have catastrophic consequences. Even though Ford redesigned the Explorer in later years, the damage was done. Its reputation suffered for nearly a decade, and Explorer became synonymous with rollover risk in the early 2000s. Today, the Ford Explorer is once again one of the best-selling SUVs in America. But that dark chapter remains a reminder of how quickly consumer trust can vanish when safety is compromised. The Explorer crisis didn't just change Ford. It reshaped the entire SUV industry's approach to safety, stability control, and tire standards. Not every SUV story is one of success. For every model that defined a generation, like the Jeep Grand Cherokee or Toyota Land Cruiser, there are others that serve as cautionary tales. The SUVs we've discussed weren't all terrible ideas on paper, but most failed because of one common factor: poor execution. Whether it was design gone wrong, timing that couldn't have been worse, or a complete misunderstanding of what buyers wanted, these vehicles show that even big brands can stumble. The SUV market rewards innovation, but it also punishes overconfidence. The good news: every failure leads to progress. Today's SUVs are safer, smarter, and more efficient because automakers learned from these mistakes. And that's what makes revisiting these disasters worthwhile. Not just to laugh at them, but to understand how the road to success is often paved with some pretty unforgettable missteps.